What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to We the People podcast. If you don't know already, my name is Brett Maurer. I'm the host of this podcast. And today we are living through history with the inauguration of the now 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden Jr. This is a major historical moment. No matter your political affiliation or anything like that, you are living through a major moment in history. So in the future, when your nieces or nephews or grandkids or your own children, great grandkids, whoever it may be, is learning about this moment in school and maybe writing a report about it or anything like that, these are the kind of days where you look back and go, oh, I remember when that happened. I was here, I was doing this, or this is the event that happened a few weeks prior, or this is what happened during the inauguration. This is how it went down. And now, with the great state of technology that we have, now you can go back and pull up videos of it, and you can see the performances that have occurred and will occur here in the next few hours. And it's just a really incredible thing to live through. And this is a major moment in history. I can't say that enough. A major moment. And take note. Take note of the things that are happening around you and where you're at and whether you agree with it or not. Because, you're living through the narrative. You are a character in the narrative of this nation, and it's a new chapter. And you are here to see it. So, whether you agree with it or not, be appreciative that we can continue to do this incredible action of our democracy and continue to thrive as a nation. And that goes for any and all elections, inaugurations, whether the person that you voted for won or not. You can be upset about who the winner is or who the loser is. But when it comes to things like this, you can still be upset that Biden was inaugurated today. But don't take for granted the fact that you're living through history. Personally myself, I was not happy when now former President Donald Trump won the election and was inaugurated. But that doesn't mean I wasn't any less invested in the election process or in the inauguration. I still watched everything. I still followed everything because these are stories that you can tell. I remember when I was younger asking my grandparents where they were and things that happened when Kennedy took office and when Kennedy was assassinated. I remember asking my mom and my dad about Bush Sr. Taking office and where they were when different things in his time as the president occurred. And those are the things that I look forward to in my future. Those are the stories I look forward to telling. Because you're telling your story and what you reacted to from history. So please, 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 please do not take today for granted, whether you agreed with it or not. Take note of what is happening around you. Take note of where you are, what you're doing, because one day this will be a story you get to tell. So that being said, keeping with the theme of inaugurations, obviously today is a major day, the inauguration of the now 46th ever president of the United States. I wanted to talk about my favorite inaugurations, or maybe the most historic inaugurations from U.S. history. These may not be good. They may be a result of, or they may have had negative results. But nonetheless, they're some of my favorite to talk about. So the first inauguration I want to talk about is the inauguration of 1909 for former President William Taft. Taft had obviously had an inauguration in March. This was when presidential inaugurations were held off until after the winter. But a freak blizzard occurred. And Taft's inauguration ended up getting covered in 10 inches of snow as Washington was hit by this freak blizzard. This became such a problem that they decided to move the entire inauguration inside. They, in fact, didn't even have a large inauguration like what we see today or what we've seen in history prior because of this snow. William Taft simply decided to take the oath of office in the Senate chambers. And this actually was an action that would be repeated years later by former President Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan would also have an inauguration where he simply took the oath of office from the Senate chambers. But the biggest issue with Taft's inauguration was actually the parade. So for those who don't know, once an inauguration is over, there's always a large parade that involves different significant members of government or of the armed forces, the Army band and Marine band and things like that play as this parade moves down the street. And it's just kind of a really fun thing, that we can watch on television. Obviously, part of it is so that the president can be presented with his now new, or he or she, with their new, military bodies and coworkers and things like that. So there's a lot of things that are involved in it. But in 1909, this parade followed, as usual, the oath of office. The blizzard became so strong that the winds ended up toppling trees and telephone poles. And this caused, in the early 1900s, the railroad systems to shut down. Streets were blocked off. So though they tried to carry on with the festivities, there were some serious technological issues that were occurring. And you have to remember, this is the early 1900s, so there wasn't a ton of technology like we have today to begin with. I did a little bit of extra research into this before talking about it, and I found a figure that city workers at the time, so this was roughly 6,000 people, along with the help of 500 wagons, worked throughout the night in order to clear the snow off of the road so that the parade could continue. They ended up clearing over 58,000 tons of snow. 58,000 tons of snow off of the street so that President Taft's carriage and the rest of the parade could pass through as usual. And for those who are history fanatics, President Taft, though he was somebody who was greatly affected by mental illness, such as depression and anxiety, he was also someone who brought very good humor into most things during his presidency. And this was the beginning of it. During his inauguration and this massive blizzard, he kept good humor and even later made a joke, quote, "I always knew it would be a cold day in hell when I became president." So this is actually considered to be probably one of the worst presidential inaugurations in history, simply because of all the issues that they ran into. So the next one that I wanted to talk about was the inauguration in 1841. So this inauguration was for President William Henry Harrison. And for those of you who don't know, William Henry Harrison was a president that was not able to do much in his presidency. And it was actually because of this very inauguration. So, William Henry Harrison was the 9th president of the United States. He happened to be an American military officer. And because of this kind of accident, we saw once again a moment where a vice president would have to take office. William Henry Harrison delivered at this inauguration what is today considered to be a terrible, awful speech. And in his speech, he made a lot of discussions and comments about Rome and how Rome affected history and even some other aspects of history. And it is considered to be one of the worst presidential speeches in history. This speech was actually considered one of the longest in inaugural address history. It consisted of 8,445 words. But to top all of it off, William Henry Harrison, who was 68 at the time, delivered this speech in the cold. Okay, it had been extremely cold at the time. I've read some different accounts. One says that there was heavy amounts of snow. Some say that it was just blistering cold. But regardless, the at the time newly elected president delivered this speech in the cold without any form of hat or coat or warm clothing. He then afterwards attended the parade, which once again, for those who don't know, is outside in this blistering cold of 1841. And then he had attended 3 different inaugural balls. So for those who don't know, the way the inauguration works is you have the inauguration, then there's a signing period where the president will sign inaugural texts. So this could be nominating cabinet members. This could also be simply a statement of, I accept the presidency of, whatever number it is. And then they sign it for historical purposes. And then after that, there is the parade, which is then followed later by inaugural ball. So Harrison gave a speech in the cold, sat in the cold for a parade, and then attended 3 different inaugural balls. And then 1 month later, he died. So he ended up getting pneumonia and pleurisy. And I think most of us know what pneumonia is, but many may not know what pleurisy is. So pleurisy is a condition when there is inflammation in the tissues that kind of surround and line the lungs and chest cavity. And you can actually sometimes end up with fluid in that lining. So he ended up getting pneumonia and pleurisy, and 1 month after being inaugurated into office, he was killed by this illness. And after that, obviously, his vice president at the time took office. And for those who don't know, the 10th president of the United States is John Tyler. He served from 1841 to 1845. So then the next inauguration I wanted to discuss is the inauguration of 1813. For those who don't know, I think I discussed this in one of my last videos. 1813, the United States was at war. We had declared war against Britain in 1812. And this is a war that lasted from 1812 to 1814 And I've even read in some cases there were some battles by troops, committed by troops who had not heard the war was ended yet, that occurred in the beginning of 1815. So, anyway, at the time of this election, obviously we are at war. And then in 1813, there is an inauguration for President James Madison. The election of 1812 was obviously held while the war took place, and this was the first time a presidential election had ever been held during a major war that the United States was involved in. It also was the first time a president was reelected during a war. With that, James Madison became the first and last president to have to worry about holding an election during a war. James Madison kind of set the precedent, so to say. No president has been failed to be reelected in wartime in the United States history since. So obviously, the United States has been involved in many wars. We've had many wars of our own. And a lot of times, people think, or at least you would think reading about history, I would be so worried if I were the president and I had to worry about a war and an election and all these other things. But as we look back over history, no president who has been involved in a war has ever been removed from office. James Madison was reelected during the War of 1812, and since then, no president has been involved in a war and not won re-election. Now, a lot of historians say that Madison really didn't intend on being a wartime president. He did mention the war a few times in his inaugural speech. And he obviously went on to continue to be president and led us through the War of 1812, which, like I said, ended in the end of 1814, beginning of 1815. I think the official date when it ended is in February of 1815 somewhere. And he lived through, the British attacking the U.S. Capitol and things like that. And the reason this is a major historical inauguration, obviously all inaugurations are historical, but this was kind of obviously it's not a solidified thing or even something that's written down anywhere, but it's kind of something that we have noticed as an anomaly in history, that since James Madison, no other president has been failed to be reelected after, being in a war. So we, can look back at Lincoln. Lincoln was up for reelection during the Civil War. He won his reelection, and he remained the president. FDR had, I believe, 2 elections that occurred within the time that World War II was running. I may be wrong about that, but I believe it was 2. So, I mean, and it occurred multiple times after that. And actually, it occurred multiple times before President Lincoln, in between President Madison and President Lincoln. So that was, once again, kind of I don't want to say accidental, but it was kind of an accidental anomaly that has been set in our history because of it. The next one that I wanted to discuss is also a kind of not very well known inauguration because it was kept private. In 1865, President Lincoln, who had won re-election, obviously, and an interesting fact about that, Lincoln not only won his re-election, but he won every state at the time except for Kentucky, Delaware, and New Jersey. So he won all but 3 states at the time. But shortly after the inauguration, he was assassinated. President Lincoln was shot and killed at Ford's Theater in April of 1865. After which, obviously, the vice president became the president of the United States. And so Andrew Johnson became the next president of the United States in 1865, and he had no form of formal inauguration. Okay. He simply took the oath of office at Kirkwood House in Washington, D.C., and he went on to be regarded as one of the worst presidents in United States history. And, they always try to put out those lists of who the best presidents and who the worst presidents are. And if I were to walk into any classroom in America or even any business in America and ask that question, there are some common names you would hear. A lot of people would consider Franklin Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, and even some others to be on the list of greatest presidents. And if I ask the question about worst presidents, they may tell me Herbert Hoover, who was the president that preceded FDR at the time of the stock market crash that became the Great Depression. Some may say Martin Van Buren, who was president at the time of the first stock market crash in United States history. But myself, and I know many of my colleagues would agree that Andrew Johnson was a pretty awful president. And this kind of hushity hush, no formal ceremony, get it done inauguration, kind of, as we look back at history, was maybe a sign as to what was to come. Obviously, he became the first president who was ever impeached. He was actually impeached on 11 articles, which means that there were 11 offenses, 11 specific reasons why they were voting to impeach him. And the last inauguration I wanted to discuss is the inauguration of 1801. So, a little backstory. John Adams' presidency did not go well. John Adams, though he did many good things as a president and politician, his presidency at the time was considered to be very, the right word isn't coming to mind, but I want to say ill for the nation. And Thomas Jefferson, who was friends but also rivals with President John Adams, ran against him in the election of 1800. Another figure that ran in this election was the infamous Aaron Burr, who would eventually go on and be the killer of the former Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Thomas Jefferson ran against John Adams and ran against Aaron Burr, who was of the same party as Thomas Jefferson, and ended up winning the election after a tie, and the congressional delegates named Thomas Jefferson president over Aaron Burr. So in 1801, Thomas Jefferson took office as the nation's third president. And this was the first time in U.S. history that a political party and kind of political party struggle was taking shape. Obviously, George Washington held his presidency. When he stepped down, there was an election. John Adams was elected as the following president. But we don't really see strong political parties until kind of the end of the Washington era and maybe even starting the Adams administration. Um, and actually, the forming of political parties was kind of a defense, which is a bad word for it, but it was kind of a defense against Alexander Hamilton and his constituents, who became known as the Federalists. Um, so at the time, we see the emergence of the Federalist and the Anti-Federalists. Thomas Jefferson was an Anti-Federalist. So he wins the election. This is the first time that political parties were taking shape in the nation, and Jefferson took office as the nation's first figure of political parties to hold the office. His election also marked the first time that the presidency passed from one party to another, because, like I said, at the time we had already seen the emergence now of these parties, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And the Federalists, George Washington, John Adams, and their constituents, held office. Thomas Jefferson took the office in the name of his party. So this is the first time that we saw the presidency transition from one party to the next. The former president, John Adams, was very bitter over the results of the election, and he actually skipped the inauguration. This was a big thing in history. You know, we always talk about one of the greatest things about our democracy is our peaceful transfer of power. You know, this was something that all the other nations in the world at the time could not understand how we were getting away with. Actually, to bring it up, one of my favorite scenes from the musical Hamilton is the scene where King George is kind of addressing the news that George Washington is stepping down from office. And he's shocked because he didn't think that the leader of a nation could step down and relinquish its power to someone else. And he had no clue how they were going to make that work and let somebody else take power. And this became a thing that America got really good at. We're still, I feel, very good at it to this day. You know, we have had peaceful transitions of powers for generations upon generations for multitudes of presidents. And this was still a peaceful transfer of power, but there's always a kind of civil precedent that is surrounded, or that this inauguration and its steps are surrounded in. So typically, you know, the presidents will meet, or well, the president and the president-elect will meet. They'll discuss, you know, the way the office kind of works. They'll tour the White House together. There's kind of a handoff, quote unquote, handoff ceremony. You know, they attend each other's, or they attend the inauguration. And for the presidents that continue to live after that, they continue to attend inaugurations if they are able and permitted. But John Adams was very upset, and he decided to skip the inauguration, which is very similar to what is occurring now in 2021. President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, was very upset with the results from the 2020 election, and he has chosen not to attend the inauguration of now President Joseph Biden. And just to add to that, former President Jimmy Carter, who is still alive, was unable to attend the inauguration because of the current global health pandemic. And so that's why I made it a point to put in there, if they are able, they attend. So this was kind of the first time that we saw a former president not attend the inauguration of a newly elected one. But Thomas Jefferson really kind of took the moment in stride, and he understood, and he reminded all his fellow citizens that there was more that could unite them and unite the nation than what could divide them. One of my favorite quotes from this is from his address is, "But every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have been called by different names, brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists." And this was his way of saying it doesn't matter who your political party is, whether you're the Republican, anti-Federalist, Federalist, later there would be the Whig Party. It didn't matter because we are all American. It doesn't matter if you agree with the results of the election or not. You know, if you disagree with the results of the election, well, vote in the next election. Make that voice heard. Or in necessity, obviously, you could rise up against the government. But, you know, in that case, you better hope you succeed. But this was a moment where the president said, you know what? The former president decided not to attend because he did not like the fact that my party took power. But you know what? It's not about parties. It's about America. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. We are all Americans. And that was the point. He wanted to unite the nation in that moment where the whole nation was so really divided. It was not divided in the same way the Civil War was, or in the same sense that we see in the modern day now, but it was divided because you had one political party that knew there was no chance of their candidate winning. They knew there was no chance of John Adams winning. And so you basically had them trying to pick the lesser of what they considered two evils, Thomas Jefferson or Aaron Burr, and it really did drive a division into the nation. And then after Thomas Jefferson takes office, with him giving this address, it was what the nation needed to draw it back together. So those are my 5 favorite inaugurations from history to talk about. There are so many others, and so many amazing historical moments, but those are the top 5 for me. I hope everybody enjoyed this video. Please, like I said, focus on what's going on in the modern world. Take notes of what is happening. This is a historic moment. If you like the content, if you want to get more content, please hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, hit the like button so that we can keep bringing you content and you can get updates as to when we post new stuff. There's going to be 2 more videos coming out this week. One's going to be on the historical figure Guy Fawkes and his failed gunpowder plot. And another video will be coming out about the inauguration that has occurred today and kind of the things surrounding it. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. Everybody, continue to stay healthy, continue to stay safe. I hope everybody has a great rest of their week wherever you're at, and make sure you tune in next time.